I came across a very interesting concept called utility writing in this blog by Ramon Ickmans. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. So, utility writing is a very useful concept, something to pass on to your copywriters. And if you're sharing content writing guidelines, this is something you may want to integrate. If you're performing a content audit, maybe this is a new lens you may want to put on and evaluate your content against. So, let's dive in. First of all, he starts with a very interesting request. He says, go to your website, pick a high value page, let's say your conversion page or the most important page on your website, right? And pick a sentence from the middle, not the intro, not the conclusion, just the middle, and then put it in somewhere like separate, okay? And then read that sentence in complete isolation and pretend you're someone else. You're someone who doesn't know your website or where you got this. Can you reproduce based on this statement that you took? What is this about? Not vaguely, specifically, or can you explicitly connect it to something else like price, name, location? And does it say something about the nature of that connection? Good, bad, cheap, expensive, that sort of thing? If the answer is no, you found your problem. And here he mentions that he's been testing a lot, and 99% of the time the tests fail. And I think we really need to have this cultural understanding in SEO that it's okay to run a test and fail. That's actually a good thing. Now, this does not work. So, an output or an outcome of a test does not necessarily have to be positive. Positive test worked great. You found something that worked. Didn't work great because you also found something that did not work. And now you know. You will not be doing busy work or sharing recommendations that are just fillers, right? And then he mentions research from Google's Gemini system showed that the typical page gets about 380 words selected. So when Google Gemini goes through your content, for every page, on average, they read 380 words. And then he mentions Dan Petrovich tested this exact article we're going through and found that while this article is 6K words, only 948 were used to ground Gemini response. The rest were invisible to Gemini for the query how to write to satisfy both LLMs and humans. So imagine you writing this lengthy in-depth guides and Gemini and other LLMs probably working the same way is ignoring most of that content. They're just focused on pulling a specific percentage of your page, right? What he's trying to say here, basically, content utility, it's a different mindset when we're approaching content, right? And the idea is to add structure to your language. So when we talk about structure data, for example, there's a debate ongoing in the industry, is it useful or not? And he's on the side of yes, it is, and I agree. But then, okay, how can you write your content the same way? So he gives an example of Sony WH, some number here, and that price is 349, availability is in stock. This can be represented very easily with structured data. Now, if you want to write that in natural language on your page, here is an example. That product, noise canceling headphones, reduce ambient noise, and then deliver 30 hours of battery light. So it gives a lot of other details. It even compares it with Apple AirPods Max and the Bose Quiet Comfort. So the structured data misses why someone should buy it, how it compares with other products, and under what conditions is this the right choice, right? This sentence does not need a machine readable overlay. It is machine readable. It contains entities, it contains relations, conditions, comparisons, specific. A knowledge graph can extract triples from it. This is what is utility writing. So it's basically the practice of writing natural language that is inherently machine processable with named entities, explicit relationships, preserved conditions, and self-contained statements. The structure machines need is the language itself, not in surrounding techniques. At first, you may feel, oh, that's what we're all saying in SEO. That's the common advice that's being circulated. But not exactly, because what we're doing, and he also mentions that in the article, and we're going to touch on that, is that people analyze the traits and attributes of pages that are being cited in LLMs and assuming that's what causes those pages to be cited in LLMs. While the idea is LLMs are probably citing those pages because they're authoritative, and authoritative pages usually have those other things. So it's a causation versus correlation situation. So the concept of utility writing matters now since we're dealing with LLMs, and it should have mattered years ago. Google has been evaluating content at the passage level since 2021. The same qualities that make content useful to ChatGPT or Perplexity, clear passages, resolved references, explicit entity relationships, self-contained statements. If you're wondering what is a self-contained statement, it's basically a statement that works on its own. It's understandable in isolation. So all of these things are the same qualities that Google's passage ranking, AI overviews, and featured snippets reward. So in Ramon's opinion, we're optimizing for one evolving system that evaluates content at the passage level. This is not about guaranteeing citations. Utility writing is not about that. And this is where he talks about the correlation situation I just mentioned. So a lot of GEO advice right now is built on a correlation trap. The reasoning brands that get cited in AI search tend to have pages with expert quotes, statistics, structured formatting, and topical depth. Therefore, add those things and you'll get cited too, right? We look at where did ChatGPT or AI overviews or Gemini pulled their answers from, and then we go to those pages, analyze how their content is written, what is in there on the page, and assume these are things that are also going to help us get cited. That's observing a trait of authoritative content and calling it a cause. High authority pages happen to have those features. Adding those features does not create authority, right? And the techniques he's going to discuss here are different. They're not authority proxies, they're structural requirements. And then he mentions that when your best content sits in the middle third of a long page, Google's passage scoring assigns it a lower position bonus. In this framework, is sharing things that are factually known to work or they don't mechanically, right? It's not guesswork, it's not correlation studies, it's information we know that can be verified. And then you can break them deliberately and observe the result. So when someone asks, but how do we know these techniques cause citations rather than just correlate with them? That's the right question instead. Like, how do we know that these are actually the cause of the citation? A page has studies or has numbers or expert quotes. How do we know that these techniques cause citations rather than correlate with them? And for most the GEO advice circulating out there, there's not a good answer. We can't tell for sure. But the techniques he's discussing here, they map to observable retrieval mechanisms, not to the content traits of pages that we're already winning. So this is not about reverse engineering what ChatGPT, for example, is citing and trying to figure out how to imitate the traits of those pages. This is about the mechanism, the mechanics of how retrieval works, and then how we can bake this in the way we create our content. And then he mentions here two stages. There are two stages to getting cited. The first is your page needs to pass source qualification. The traditional authority checks, EEAT, domain trust, topical authority. Your page needs to pass those initial checks. That gate did not go away. But then once your page passes those checks, then what happens is the content on your page is evaluated in chunks. So your page gets in the door on authority, your passage gets cited on quality. Every retrieval architecture, whether it's Google Passage Scorer, a RAG pipeline, or a proposition extractor, asks the same question about a chunk of text. How probable is it that this answers the query? The writing techniques that raise the probability work across all of them, which is exactly the point. So every retrieval system, every retrieval mechanism is looking at chunks of your page and trying to answer how probable is it that this answers the query. The techniques we're discussing here are the ones that are going to raise your probability. So, the article here focuses on making the language on your own pages more useful to machines. Another thing he mentions here, and this is really interesting. So, Dan Petrovich, researcher on Google's Gemini system, analyzed over 7,000 queries and found a grounding budget of roughly 1,900 words per query, split across sources. The top source gets about 530 words. The fifth source, for example, about 270 words. For individual pages, the typical selection is around 380 words. So on average, a Google Gemini system would only select 380 words of your page. It gets worse. Pages under 5,000 characters get about 66 of their content used. Pages over 20,000 characters get 12%. Adding more content dilutes your coverage without increasing what gets selected. So more is not more. And yes, we want to be thorough, we want to be in-depth, but make sure you're not diluting your coverage of a topic. And one of the advice I'm sure you've heard or seen is stop adding fluffs. Stop trying to increase the word count, right? Word count is not a ranking factor. It's not going to help you. In fact, it can, if you're not offering value, if you don't have self-contained statements, for example, things that are ambiguous, it's just going to dilute your coverage and hurt your performance. So, yeah, your best content needs to be dense, self-contained, and positioned where systems will find it, not longer. So density beats length. And then he has this tool here, and I actually tried the tool. I added my bio here, and this was my bio, right? And then he rewritten it. Like this tool rewrites it for you. So he says positioning, selection. So it's missing firm name client or qualified outcomes. So it needs to have more specifics, right? Extractability, relationships, citability. So it lacks entities, firm name or client name, stronger version. So you need to, is there a sentence an AI could quote as a fact about you? These are good pointers for me to work on, right? Okay, let's go back to the article. So here are the 5 points, and he calls them the iCart language utility framework. Number 1, put your best material where systems will find it. Research on long context models shows that information position matters. Claims near the beginning or end of content get used more reliably than claims buried in the middle. So, if the most important part of your answer sits in the middle, promote it upper on the page or repeat it at a tighter form near the beginning. This maps directly to web content. If your key conclusion sits halfway down a 3,000 word page, it will probably become functionally invisible. And then he gives a lot of examples here. So within any piece of content, there's a core block of 500, 600 words containing the most important claims. Know where that block is and make sure it's in the first 20% or last 20%, not in the middle. Then the second thing is, give the system a reason to pick you over alternatives. Getting retrieved isn't the same as getting cited. Yes. Research on product descriptions tested 15 different rewriting strategies, and after optimization, they all converged on the same features: alignment with user intent, comparison against alternatives, inclusion of external evidence like reviews, and preserved factual accuracy. Makes sense when you think about it. The formula here is basically state what it is, who it's for, what job it does, and under what constraints it wins. When you're talking about a product, what it is, who it's for, what job it does, and under what constraints it wins. Right? So here's an example. A user asks an AI, what are good neighborhoods in Antwerp for families under 400K? The following text might resonate on an emotional level, but it offers nothing useful. Charming family home in green, In a green, family-friendly neighborhood, this beautiful property offers everything you need for comfortable living. Very ambiguous in its, emotional thing, as he mentioned. But which neighborhood? What price? How many bedrooms? The system has to guess. It won't need to guess with this text, though. So this is an alternative. This three-bedroom terrace house, what it is, in Bersham, Antwerp, is listed at 385K. Bersham offers direct tram access to Antwerp Central Station, 12 minutes, 3 primary school. Like, he added more details, right? So, what it is, who is it for, what job it does, and under what constraints it wins. And then he mentions, yes, we're writing for both humans and machines, and yes, we need the emotion part, but right now we're focused on the utility. Third thing is make every sentence survive on its own. And I think this is what was mentioned earlier as self-contained sentences. The most common failure mode is coreference, pronouns and vague references that break the moment a sentence gets extracted without its neighbors. And then research backs this up. Preposition level retrieval, where systems decompose text into atomic self-contained claims, outperform passages and sentence level retrieval. And the main quality problem in automated proposition extraction, failure to resolve coreferences, exactly the it and this problem. So, for example, it supports the latest Wi-Fi standard, which gives it a significant advantage over the previous model, blah, blah, blah. What is it? Which Wi-Fi standard? Which previous model and what improvement? And then he shares some pattern. Unresolved pronouns. It features that what device. Vague demonstrative plus what. This gives it. This and it. What gives what an advantage. And so on. So have a look at this. Fourth thing is state the relationships, not just the entities. It's not about which concepts you mention, it's about whether you explicitly connect them. Graph-based retrieval systems build knowledge graphs from content by extracting subject, predicate, object, triples from natural language, right? Without any predefined schema. Content with clear subject, verb, object structures gets extracted more accurately than bullet lists without verbs, tables without context, or fragments that require inference. So let's look at an example. Interest rates are important for mortgages. Your credit score matters. A larger down payment is beneficial. PMI is an additional cost. These are all sentences that work on their own, but they're not connected. Last but not least, include at least one sentence an LLM could directly quote. We go back here. One of the things that were recommended for me to improve is there a sentence an AI could quote as a fact about you? So I need to go back to my bio and make sure there is a sentence AI can quote or cite, right? And then he gives an example. This is a great copy maker that produces excellent results and is very popular with customers. In contrast, here's a citable version. The Breville Barista Express produces espresso at 9 bars of pressure with a built-in whatever, and so on, right? So think of including in your content a citable sentence. So this is a very interesting read. I highly recommend you go through it. There's still more that you can still read, and he's also mentioning how to combine the utility writing with emotional persuasion, which is basically writing for humans. And in his opinion, the next step is UX with utility writing. And yeah, keep an eye on this resource, give this tool a try, and I hope you found this useful. I personally did, and that's why I'm sharing it. If you like this content, please share, subscribe, leave a comment, and see you. Bye.